Reviewing. Reviewing never changes. The end of the fandom as we knew it occurred as no one could have predicted. The bronies were plunged into an abyss of over 620,000 words. The details plenty and thought through, but it was not, as some had suspected, just another crossover fiction. Instead, it was the beginning for a new fandom within the fandom. In the early days, many missed out on the experience because they did not know about this novel. But that is about to change. For on this fateful day, when you decided to watch this video, we are going to open a new world for you.
Hello there, this is the AnY Pony and welcome to my review of Fallout Equestria by KCat. With over 620,000 words, it is one of the longest self-published works of derivative fiction in existence. It spawned a whole sub-fandom among bronies, inspiring hundreds more fictions and counting taking place in the universe created in this novel, including the 1.153 million word-long spin-off Project Horizon by Somber, but this one is for another day. Today it is all about KCat's original epos. The whole idea of Fallout Equestria came to KCat in early 2011 when she came across this image on DeviantArt. She started to imagine how this concept could actually work and eventually started writing. I am stallion enough to admit that this is too much for me alone. That's why I gathered a group of YouTubers who are familiar with the novel, like AnY here.
Hello, you people, you. Okay. Oh, seriously, what am I supposed to say? I haven't even finished the story yet. No spoilers, players.
You haven't?
That's what I've been trying to tell you for weeks now.
But in one of your videos, whatever. How about a short first impression?
Oh, if you insist. See, I started listening to the online audiobook by a Scorch mechanic a while back. I found the story to be so interesting that it actually managed to transform the voice I was hearing into an effective part of the world. The first thing that really struck me about it was how thoroughly descriptive it is, and yet doesn't devolve into tedium. And that's always a good sign. But there's more, of course. I suppose you could herald my appreciation of it with some infinitely helpful catch-all statement like, "It's well written." But come on, that's the price of entry. No, what's really tickled my fancy about it is the always fascinating concept of sticking cute animal people in heinous grown-up situations. For the same reason I enjoy stuff like Conker's Bad Fur Day. I think the disconnect between that familiar contempt we feel for our own species and the love we have for innocent animals gives us an interesting vantage point from which to view such a story with its grimness, despair, and sexual confusion. Lo, when it's given life by a cast of adorable ponies who are innately impossible to dismiss with the same disappointment one feels for one's own kind. Also, in what other work could one ever hope to hear the phrase, "Clop my with a hoof full of sunfire"? Genius! Anyways, ciao. You lot can saunter back into Spoiler Town now. I'm off to shoot aliens in a faraway video game. Bye!
Yeah dude, thanks for dropping by. Not too long ago, KCat decided to upload her story to FimFiction, so I can do my usually tech routine. As dark, in addition with mature and gore already suggests, this story is not your casual Sunshine and Rainbows lecture. The story asks quite a lot from its reader. It is brutal, includes passages that can easily be described as horror, unpleasant topics like death, guilt, addiction, slavery and cannibalism. And not in the ridiculous over-the-top way like so many other grimdark fictions, but in a rather serious manner that has the real potential to get to you. All that comes to no surprise, because the novel is a crossover between MLP and the famous video game franchise known as Fallout. As in the game, the protagonist of the story travels across a post-apocalyptic wasteland fighting for survival. The setup for Fallout Equestria is that 200 years ago there has been a multiple-decade-long war between the ponies of Equestria and the zebras. Eventually, mega spells, the magical fantasy equivalent of atomic bombs, had been fired in mass. What did not only end the war, but turned the world into one gigantic, hostile, poisonous wasteland, full of monsters, magical radiation, and desperate survivors who are slowly losing using her equine equivalent to humanity in order to stay alive. In tradition of the first and third video game, the story begins in one of the underground bunkers, in this interpretation known as stables instead of vaults, that had been created in order to protect members of ponykind from the apocalypse. One of the inhabitants of that sealed off piece of pre-war civilization is Little Pip, our protagonist and narrator. Through circumstances you can read for yourself, she suddenly finds herself ripped out of her uneventful life in the stable and thrown out into the wasteland. And that's literally only the beginning, just like in the games. From here on out we follow Little Pip as she explores the wasteland, tries to help ponies while struggling with her inner demons, makes new friends as well as enemies, discovers the horrors and mysteries of the wasteland as well as of the past, unraveling how a world in which friendship once was magic could fall apart like that. Now I keep mentioning those games, and that raises a question if somebody who is not familiar with the games can enjoy this fiction as well. This is a general difficulty with this kind of crossovers. Since writers are usually fans of all sources for the crossover, it is difficult for them to think from the perspective of a reader who is only familiar with one side of the crossover. Often enough, enthusiastic references turn into confusing WTF moments for this kind of reader. Well, the entirety of the story takes place in the MLP universe, so I guess you kind of need to be into stories featuring a mostly quadrupedal cast. About the other source material, so, well, why don't we ask somebody who is actually a fan of Fallout Equestria but never played any of the games. Welcome to the show, Dr. Wolf.
Greetings and good evening, everyone. Indeed, I thoroughly enjoyed listening to Fallout Equestria without ever having played any of the Fallout games. Only thing I knew about them was that they took place in a post-apocalyptic world. I admit that I was a little puzzled at how some of the gadgets worked. Like the Pip-Buck, it seemed like such an overly powerful tool for use in the Wastelands. But as I went on, I feel that the author made it blend very well with the overall story, and there were even some moments when the Pip-Buck became more of a hindrance than a help. And even more than that, there were several other Fallout references that I didn't get at first, but now having gone through the entire story here, I understand quite a bit more about the overall plot of the Fallout series. I can certainly appreciate how this fanfiction can draw in the reader so well even if they don't understand all the references the first time they hear them. Although I would definitely say that knowing a lot about the MLP universe will help a great deal in how much you can enjoy the story. Knowing about the Fallout series story is optional, but you will be confused at many parts of this fanfiction if you don't know anything about MLP. With that said, I do believe that some people could actually get into this story even without any knowledge of Fallout or MLP. It would take quite a bit of suspension of disbelief, but the characters are just so enjoyable and so memorable that there may actually be potential with people who are unfamiliar with either genre.
Well, I am actually not even sure if everything like, for example, the Pit-Boy ever really gets explained in the games either. Being mainly familiar only with Fallout 3, there's a lot I can't tell myself. But it is sure fun as hell to see all those elements from the game that are intelligently woven into the novel. Small things like the Wasteland survival guide, the tower full of snobs with ghouls in the basement, and indestructible clipboards found their way into the novel, as well as small critical statements about more silly aspects of the game, like the ridiculous places where you can find loot. But also big elements from more than one game have been picked up by KCAT, got ponyfied and put together as a new independent story. The mysterious DJ broadcasting through the Wasteland, the super mutants and their master, even the freaking Enclave got completely reinvented. One of my favorites, in Fallout 3, a mercenary group called the Talons gets introduced. KCAT turns them into a mercenary group called the Talons, who are all griffins. But now I have to wonder myself, how much of the story actually borrowed from the games? Hey Jim, you've played the Fallout games rather extensively, haven't you? Can you maybe answer that question?
Hey ANY. If by extensively you mean played 3 in New Vegas several times over for a couple of 100 hours or so per game, then yes I have. If you mean played every game in the series, then no I haven't. I tried to play the original Fallout, but it wasn't really my cup of tea. However, Fallout Equestria is, from what I can tell, mainly rooted in the third game, so to get all of the references, that's the only one you'll actually need to have played. I have to admit, I couldn't help but grin whenever I noticed a reference to the game, of which there are many, as ANY listed only a few, and it was interesting to see how KCAT would work a reference to a post-apocalyptic video game series into the world of Equestria. I've really got to give KCAT credit for how brilliantly she weaves these two seemingly completely antithetical settings together into a cohesive whole that actually feels like a real place and resembles both but mirrors neither. Fallout Equestria really is its own creature, though I laughed more than a bit when KCAT took time to critique the game via Little Pip's interior monologue. Elements from the game are definitely recognizable. One of the best examples of this are the Talons. The way the morality system works in Fallout 3, you will always be hunted by someone who doesn't like you. The Talons are the group that come after you if you choose the good path, operating on the evil side of the moral slider the game uses. The Talons in Fallout Equestria, however, are far more fleshed out. Their leader, Gardena Grimfeathers, has a strict moral code, and once she makes a business deal, she is completely loyal to the terms of the contract, no matter the goal or who it was made with. The only thing that'll make her go back on a deal is if the person the deal was made with betrays her, and the Talons are fiercely loyal to their matriarch. This is just one example of KCAT subverting the source material on both sides to her own ends, and she pulls it off brilliantly. Though, like Dr. Wolf said, you don't have to be intimately familiar with both franchises to enjoy the story. It just helps. But to get back to the moral system in the game versus the moral system in the story, KCAT basically perfects what the game's system should have been. In the game, there was usually a clear delineation between good and evil. KCAT's presentation of moral dilemmas are much more subtle and nuanced than those presented in the game. The moral ambiguity of the story blurs the lines between the traditional roles of hero and villain. From what I've read, I'd be very hesitant to call anyone a hero or villain in this story. Everyone has different motivations for what they're doing, and everybody in this story performs heroic and questionable and sometimes even downright cruel actions. This type of moral ambiguity reflects the games very well, as the moral system in Fallout 3 was a spectrum that the player could sit at any point on. You could be completely evil, killing anybody that came across your path, stealing from people, even slaughtering entire towns just because you had a bad day or wanted what they had. Alternatively, you could be a veritable messiah, cleaning up the wasteland and doing good deeds wherever you go. On the third side, you could be completely neutral and choose not to get involved in others' problems, or on that same notion of neutrality, perform an evil action and then a good action to balance it out. The player is allowed and even encouraged, through the ability to have multiple characters and playthroughs, to explore the spectrum to the fullest, because there are differing rewards and difficulty levels for each choice. Though I will admit it got a bit tougher when you went the evil route. My point here is that just because a character is perceived as evil by the protagonist, they probably do not see themselves that way. There's a lot of room for interpretation, and most characters in this story have very good reasons for what they're doing, even if the actions they take are seen as evil.
I certainly agree. Even with the evil characters that we see in the story, their motivations are not always so simple as you might expect them to be. I love that the writer added an excellent amount of depth to some of the villains, giving them understandable and even relatable reasons as to why they do what they do. They can still be despicable and even seem outright insane at times. But when it comes to learning about who they are and what they are trying to do, there's actually some real thought being put into their motivations. These characters become so memorable because they seem quite unlike anything we have come across before, while still being a very threatening and even frightening presence in the story.
KCAT sure created some amazing bad guys. Naturally, we learn about them comparatively late within the story. Experiencing the story through Little Pip's eyes, the focus is on her group of friends and the ponies they meet most of the time.
The character interactions are also fantastic. We get a lot of really funny moments when we see some of their personality aspects begin to clash, and that makes for a nice break once in a while, considering that a lot of the story focuses on trying to survive a post-apocalyptic world. Each new character that gets introduced adds an enjoyable aspect to the group dynamic, both for the good characters and the evil characters. There are also many moments where the protagonist can choose to turn away from danger. They can choose to walk away and try to make a happy life somewhere else, and there are even times when they are encouraged to do so by those closest to them. But the story creates some very inspiring moments when the characters are choosing to face the danger head on, even if for no other reason than because it is the right thing to do. Reminds me a lot of Sam's speech near the end of The Two Towers.
True that. However, while every single reoccurring character provides enough content for his or her own analysis video, we have to cut this part short here in order to keep the spoilers to a minimum. I just have to say that KCAT created some of the most impressive original characters I have come across so far. Deep, multi-layered, creative, and their interactions with each other and their environment felt natural and consistent throughout the story. Instead, let's look a bit deeper into one outstanding aspect of the novel that you don't come across very often in this form and quality.
Fallout Equestria's presentation of addiction, as it is very realistic. Just because somebody is addicted to a certain substance, except in the case of much harder drugs such as crack and heroin, does not mean they are unable to function in the real world without it. Having been an addict myself, as well as delved into junkie culture for several years, not taking heroin or anything like that, but reading books by junkies and exploring the ideas and concepts that circle addiction itself and junkie culture in general, this is one of the most realistic portrayals of addiction in literature that I've seen since Junkie by William S. Burroughs. Unless the drug one is addicted to is very heavy, as is the case with things like opium, crack, cocaine, heroin, etc., the addiction is not the overriding force in the addict's mind. It's simply there, and they go through their normal day, or what passes for a normal day in Fallout Equestria, and simply take it when they can get it. The addict character's dilemma demonstrates this quite nicely, as well as showing that it is possible to get over addiction through personal strength, as seen in the places where she firmly puts the thought of mentals out of her mind so that she can focus on the job at hand using only her natural abilities. It also stays very true to the game because there were several drugs floating around, from alcohol to some kind of post-apocalyptic form of heroin, and it is very possible for the player character to become addicted to these substances, forcing them to either seek treatment or make sure that they have some of whatever they're addicted to on them at all times, as going into withdrawal severely weaken the character. Bones break easier, hands shake when aiming, and I believe VAT's accuracy was reduced as well, though that's something I'd have to check up on. This is also a subtle way to teach the dangers of drugs and addiction, as keeping a steady supply of mentats, psycho, alcohol, or whatever else the character happens to be addicted to takes up inventory space, and can get quite expensive. Not to mention the withdrawals if you can't get your fix.
Now, Dr. Wolf, there's something I was wondering. You always strike me as a person who prefers the more family-friendly and positive aspects of life. You are always very kind and use a very clean language. As I mentioned earlier, Fallout Equestria is a rather mature lecture. Has this been a problem for you?
Indeed. I would not hesitate to call this story a masterpiece were it not for that. The one thing that I do have to complain about is the fact that this story is extremely profane, gory, and highly suggestive. In particular, Little Pip, who happens to be the main character, is frequently using language that would shock a lot of people who are reading or listening to this story. And there really isn't any reason why the story had to have so much language, gore, or such highly suggestive themes in order to get the readers so invested into the characters. I would argue that this story would still be just as powerful and memorable if the writer toned down these elements, show that the world is full of harshness and misery without being so explicit about it. Leave more elements to the reader's imagination rather than spelling out the gory details so frequently. You can leave a deep impact on your reader without shocking them with constant obscenities. But perhaps that's just me?
I have to disagree with Dr. Wolf on the obscenity and violence. The fact of the matter is that these characters are living in a harsh environment, and violent actions as well as harsh language is something that the author uses to juxtapose this world with the Equestria we all know and love. It's fairly obvious to me that this story is not meant for children, and I appreciate the author not pandering to pretentious moralizers who can't handle a bit of blood and foul language. When Little Pip first runs into the slavers, and they speak of raping and torturing her, then wind up getting their heads blown off, after which their other prisoner betrays and tries to rob her, it gives Little Pip an important lesson about the world she finds herself in. This is not the safe tomb of the stables, nor is it the egalitarian paradise that Equestria seems to be in the show and in the legends they have within the story. This world is harsh, violent, and will kill you, and the sooner Little Pip realizes that, the sooner she can go about properly surviving.
Well, as somebody who actually does enjoy grimdark stories and actually had to laugh out loud at some of Little Pip's more creative curses, I actually do like the story even more for featuring those themes. Nevertheless, I can see your point, Dr. Wolf. A lot of the story's accessibility for the more casual reader has been given up by KCAT when she chose to give the novel this mature tone. What also brings me to the last point of this video, the reading recommendation. As we just established, this is no story for children, and you might have to stomach a lot, not only in regards to the foul language and the gore, but also the deep moral dilemmas, the horrors our group of friends has to face, and all the sacrifices and losses first the war and later the Wasteland demand from the ponies. And I am actually talking out of first-hand experience here. I have been hinting for a long time now that there has been this one fiction that really got to me. It has not been Cupcakes or one of the other gore fests, and it has also not been a highly emotionally touching one like My Little Dashie. No, I was referring to Fallout Equestria, but here now is not the time for that, especially since it would be rather spoiler heavy. let me just say, this story has the potential to really throw you off balance.
You know, ANY, if you ever wish to speak with someone about that, you are always welcome to join me for a moment with Dr. Wolf on my channel.
This would actually be great. I really could use an opportunity to get this off my chest. If it is okay for you, I would like to come with you right after we are done with the review here.
Whenever you like.
Thanks, Doc. So yeah, keep in mind, Fallout Equestria, while extremely funny and often enough heartwarmingly beautiful, is not an easy ride. Not at all. But one very worth its time. It has also an amazing rereadability value. From the moment Little Pip exits the stable, if I think about it even before that, the reader is constantly confronted with foreshadowing puzzle pieces and seemingly unimportant information that will turn out to be relevant from the get-go. On the first read-through, you will probably be as confused as Little Pip with only a little bit more insight since you know pre-war Equestria. Only on second read-through you will realize how well KK planned out the over 600,000 word long novel from the first chapter onwards.
Fallout Equestria is the kind of story that keeps you in suspense practically the whole way through. There wasn't a single chapter I finished where I didn't want to know what would happen next. The characters are deeply engaging, relatable, and even inspiring. The world is immense and richly detailed. And like I said before, I would call this story a masterpiece, if not for the excessive profanity, gore, and suggestive themes. Were it not for those elements, I wouldn't hesitate to recommend this story to any fan of MLP. I do remember thoroughly enjoying the inspiring moments throughout the fanfiction. I do remember laughing at some of the more memorable character interactions. I do remember feeling so invested into the struggle that I wanted to see how everything would come together in the end. But at the same time, I simply cannot recommend the story to others, especially those with impressionable young minds.
All in all, Fallout Equestria is a very well-written novel, and more than worth a read in my opinion. Though once again I need to stress, this is not for children. Like ANY and the Good Doctor said, this story handles very mature topics like death and addiction, trying moral dilemmas, and has more than its fair share of gore and creative cursing. So this is definitely for those who like a darker mood with their MLP fanfictions. However, if you can get past all that, then you'll find a novel full of realistic characters with hopes, dreams, loves, and loss getting swept up in an epic journey they never intended on having, and coming out the other side vastly changed from who they were going in. This story has wonderful characters, a dynamic setting, an incredible amount of lore, and enough well-executed references to make a fan of either Fallout 3 or My Little Pony happier than Rainbow Dash with an endless supply of cider.
And if you are like me too lazy to read the story yourself, I highly recommend simply listening to Crazed Rambling's dramatic reading of it. This is AnY Pony saying see you soon. Now, about this moment with Dr. Wolf.
Right this way. So Mr. ANY, tell me what's on your mind.